Okay, well, welcome everyone who has joined. We have a few more people joining us right now. My name is James Elsmore from Island Innovation, and I'm the Master of Ceremonies. Many of you were here yesterday, and so hopefully you'll be accustomed to the technology. But just a quick reminder, we would encourage you to go ahead and say hello in the chat. So please do, as we get started, send a greeting to everyone in the chat so we know who you are, what organization you're joining from, and which country you're joining from. I know we have a lot of colleagues from Africa joining this session, and it would be great to see which parts of the continent are represented. When you send that message, please select the blue box and click panelists and attendees. So your message will go out to all panelists and attendees. And I'm not seeing any messages yet, but if someone wants to be the brave first person, and we'll see everyone introducing themselves over the chat. Just a reminder, also, we will have Q&As. So if you have a question for any of the speakers, we ask that you send in your question in the Q&A tab, not in the chat. So our moderator will be taking questions from the Q&A, and also you will be able to vote for questions. So if you already see your question, no need to send it again. You can just vote up questions, and you can also add comments to any questions that come through in the Q&A. Just a reminder that this session will be recorded and also is being live streamed on Facebook. So hello to everyone watching the recording and through Facebook. And finally, there is an interpretation option. So if you would like to listen in French or in Spanish, you can click the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen and select that language. So all of the sessions this week will have interpretation to make them more accessible. That's the main announcement for now. I will now hand over to our moderator for today, Karen Price, the National Coordinator of the Malawi Environment Endowment Trust and CAFE President. So over to you, Karen. You can just unmute your microphone.
Unmute.
There we go. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. And good morning to our colleagues. Good afternoon to friends, wherever you are. And it's really an honor to have you join us for the first session of the second day of the virtual Red Light and CAFE Congress. This afternoon, the first session kicks off with stories from the field. And this is a session that will share practical examples from conservation trust funds in the CAFE network. And the two conservation trust funds are Biofund from Mozambique and Tany Meva from Madagascar. And we have two speakers that I will be presenting to you shortly. Our first speaker this afternoon is Sean Nazreli. And Sean is a biodiversity and natural resource management specialist with 22 years of experience in international development. He has specialized in protected area management, business planning, innovative conservation finance initiatives, as well as environmental and social monitoring of petroleum developments in Mozambique. He's also the co-author of the feasibility study on sustainable financing of conservation areas in Mozambique, and the author of, amongst others, the current financial plan for the country's protected area network. He contributed regularly to the development of the new conservation law and regulations in Mozambique, and he has also been instrumental in bringing the concept of biodiversity offsets to Mozambique, leading the design of a roadmap for the country. He has also assisted the ministry to elaborate the National Forest Investment Plan to reform the forest sector and reduce deforestation in the country via the use of REDD+ funds. He has been involved with the Foundation for the Conservation of Biodiversity, Biofund, since before its creation, facilitating its foundation in 2011. So Biofund is a private financial institution with the aim of financing the conservation of biodiversity in Mozambique. And he's currently the Director of Innovative Financing, where he's responsible for developing new mechanisms such as biodiversity offsets, payment for ecosystem services, and private sector support. And this afternoon, we'll be hearing a little bit more about how Biofund has had to mitigate the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on the conservation sector in Mozambique. So welcome to Sean Nazreli. And our second speaker this afternoon from Tany Meva is Claude Fanohisa. I hope I have pronounced it correctly, Claude. But Claude is the executive director of the Tany Meva Foundation in Madagascar from 2018. And Tany Meva is a national institution generating financial resources to support local community and civil society, aiming to improve their environment and considering sustainable development. Tany Meva was created in 1996 and is currently in the process of implementing its fourth strategic plan from 2017 to 2021. Which is focused on the protection of the environment, promoting behavior change, tackling climate change, and improving life conditions. In 2010, Claude worked for several international organizations working on conservation, such as WWF Madagascar as regional coordinator, or the Indian Ocean Commission through the Integrated Coastal Zone Management as national secretary. So back in 2011, Tany Meva, in partnership with the EU, the European Union, supported some programs on renewable energy through micro hydropower plants in rural areas of Madagascar. And Claude is joining us this afternoon to share some of the experiences from Tany Meva and the lessons learned in implementing this hydropower plant that is being managed by local structures inspired by a community-based approach and combined with a financial sustainable mechanism in the form of a payment for ecosystem services. So welcome to Claude. We look forward to both presentations. As James mentioned earlier, could participants please put their questions in the link below so that we can have time to address those, the speakers, and can have time to address those at the end of both their sessions. So we look forward to that, and I will kick off with Sean. Sean, over to you.
Thanks very much, Karen, for that lovely introduction. I'm going to just share my screen now. Good morning to everyone. It's really a privilege to be here and to be asked to speak on behalf of Biofund to this wonderful group of people, friends, people I've come to know through these networks over the last 10 years. And it's great to see so many of you here virtually, and a whole lot of new people who I've never met and who are probably participating for the very first time, taking advantage of this virtual format. So congratulations to CAFE and to REDLAC for innovating in the face of necessity. And it's a pleasure to be with all of you here today. I have been asked to speak to you about the Biofund Emergency Program. And we've called it the Emergency Biofund, Protecting Natural Resources in a Time of Crisis. And this is the response that Biofund has come to present in the face of the COVID crisis here in Mozambique. So just very quickly, who we are first. Biofund, as Karen mentioned, we are situated down in the southeast corner of Africa. We were founded in 2011. We officially launched in 2015. We have, unlike most funds, we actually have a membership, a General Assembly that has more than 50 members, individuals, and key institutions in conservation in Mozambique. And we're currently managing an endowment fund of just about $38 million, along with implementing projects of over $20 million of money from other third-party funders. Mozambique, just to note, has nearly 26% of its country's terrestrial area covered by its protected area network. Biofund operates with 3 pillars: consolidating itself as an institution, its core business financing conservation, and then working also on creating an enabling environment, recognizing that conservation itself will not function unless we have a proper environment for it to operate within. 2020 has been a year of people and biodiversity challenges. It was supposed to be a biodiversity super year. Has turned out to be a little bit different than all of us imagined in January, and has in fact forced upon us, as indeed I mentioned about Red Lacking Cafe's virtual Congress, a year of innovation. So what has all this meant for the conservation sector in Mozambique? I think many of these impacts will be common across countries. Certainly within sub-Saharan Africa, most of these problems are virtually identical in all of your countries as well. There have been significant impacts on the economic and social sectors, particularly in tourism. By the end of May, we had already lost more than 22,000 jobs in the cultural and tourism sector in Mozambique. Now, for us, about 65% or 2/3 of the protected area network in Mozambique is actually managed by private operators, most of them working in the sport hunting sector. And as with other tourism sectors, all of these have had their incomes devastated. For many of these operators in Mozambique, they have had, in fact, no tourists at all for the entire year. Their operating year is usually between June and November, December. By the time June came along, everyone had canceled. Our protected area agency, known as ANAC, has lost about $3 million in its revenues for this year as well. And this puts a huge pressure and problem in place. And an analysis done by us back in the first half of the year is that we might be facing a situation where half the rangers in the country could lose their jobs and be laid off. This would have inevitable and incredibly negative effects, not just for this year, but for years to come in lost fauna, in lost protection. So what did we do? In June, the board of directors approved the creation of what is being called our emergency biofund under the motto, protecting natural resources in a time of crisis, with the specific aim of ensuring that the jobs of rangers and essential support personnel for patrolling are secured, to continue to allow the regular patrolling activities in the protected areas, and these are both the ones under public and private management throughout the country. The team, this is the Biofund team, with a very supportive board of directors and a quick capacity to respond. We took advantage of the windfall profits that we achieved in 2019 from a very, very profitable year for our endowment, and actually took advantage of the fact that we have an endowment that could potentially be used to provide loans and then paid back later. We used this opportunity to establish the Emergency Biofund. So what does it mean? Our phase one actually was originally just for 3 months. It's now recently been extended all the way to June of next year. It consists of donations directly to the private sector to cover the costs of their ranger salaries until June of next year. Also, for the public sector, there are a number of the rangers in our protected system that are paid for out of own revenues from ANAC in the protected areas. And again, a revenue stream that has dried up completely. As well, we are providing operating cost support to both the public and private sector protected area managers and systems in order to allow those ranger forces not just to have the people, but also continue to operate their fuel, their food rations in the field, their communications, etc. There's also a certain amount of community support that is being phased in now. In Mozambique, there is a revenue sharing agreement on revenues coming in from the protected areas that provide a certain percentage for communities, that revenue also has dried up. And so we are trying to substitute at least some of that revenue for communities. The original period, as I mentioned, was 3 months. It's now been extended by another 9 months to the end of next June. If needed, we have also agreed in principle at the board level that we can use the capital from our endowment to make zero interest loans to private sector operators to continue to allow them to survive after June next year if they still need support. Of course, that will be dependent on the progress of COVID-19 in the country and globally, as well as our own financial position, because we have been involved in specific fundraising for this support. And I think one of the lessons here is that this flexibility and this quick response has really had a good and resonating effect in the donor community as well. So in fact, this fund has grown quite quickly. As I mentioned, the board approved an initial $1 million in grants from the Biofund Endowment Fund. This was quickly joined by other donors. And now we have now secured another roughly $250,000 from USAID and another $1 million from the Swedish government through an ongoing program called Mozambique here in Mozambique. Additionally, as mentioned, Biofund is prepared to put in another $2 million in loans from our endowment if this is necessary, resulting in a fund that could be as high as $4.3 million, allowing us to meet the needs that are projected. In terms of critical steps, we had very quickly, we made contact with the conservation areas and the respective operators. We have never before supported private sector operators, so it was a new foray for us as a fund. We quickly put together a project team using both people we already had who were less occupied because of some of the personnel savings, shall we say. Because of COVID, there were some jobs that are just less things to do. We also recruited a few extra people to join the team. We established quickly some procedures and accountability on monitoring. I'll talk a little bit about that next, the third session tonight, about our safeguards issues. We launched the fund quickly, disclosed it in the media, had lots and lots of media coverage, making sure the word got out to all the operators and potential beneficiaries. And we've been contracting and dispersing since July of this year. So really within 1 month of creating the fund, we now have been dispersing funds and obviously been involved in encouraging new partnerships and new fundraising. The impact on our beneficiaries, we now are supporting 12 different protected areas under private management. I'm not sure how well you can see that. It's the ones in red on this map. 2 areas that are community conservation areas in Mozambique, the nice bright blue ones, and 11 protected areas under public management. This, at the moment, sums up to just about 12 million hectares, or something like the size of, for our Latin American friends, this is about the size of Nicaragua, or about 1/3 the size of the entire Central American group of countries. So it's quite a large area that is being secured for biodiversity patrolling. We're now supporting, as of last week, in fact, this number's now gone up again by about another 70 or 80 this week. We were supporting just under 300 rangers and support staff, carrying out nearly 1,000 patrols a month, which is more than 30,000 or almost 30,000 patrol hours during this support period. And the nearly 2 million hectares of biodiversity was protected just in the first 3 months of the program. So that's what we've done. I think what we've managed to do is take really key advantage of those added value that environmental funds have. We have an endowment fund, we have our own money so we can react quickly. Just a board decision was enough to us to mobilize those funds. Being on the ground, we're close to those beneficiaries and to the suffering on the ground, so we have a very good idea of what the needs are. And we also have a flexible response system. Being an independent fund, we have our own procedures and we're able to operate within them and make and invent in the face of necessity. So, obrigado, thank you, merci, gracias, and I'm interested in hearing any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Sean, for that very inspiring presentation about Biofund's response to the COVID pandemic. As I mentioned at the beginning of the session, to participants that have questions, please post them in the quick Q&A below so that we can have a really meaningful discussion at the end of the session. At this point, I'd like to hand over to Claude, Claude from Tany Meva, who will also be presenting their experience in hydropower, a community-based approach, and payment for ecosystem services as the mechanism behind it. Claude, over to you. The presentation will be shared shortly.
Yes, okay. So thank you so much, Karen, to give me this opportunity to present our experiences on hydroelectric power plant in Madagascar. And now we have on the screen the presentation. It takes around 6 or 8 minutes. So I'm not going to present Fondation Tany Meva because at the beginning of our session, thanks to Karen, I hope you could get some information, key informations on Tany Meva Foundation. Today, we are going to talk a lot about payment for ecosystem services mechanism in Madagascar. I mean, in rural areas, combined with our experiences on micro hydroelectric power plant. The key message on which we would like to share with you today is how effective is this sustainable finance mechanism, I mean PES, to finance conservation in rural areas, in a field where people are very poor, they have enough money to get electricity, and for us, it is important after 8 years of experimentation to share these great experiences. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so from 2017 and 2 years before that year, the government of Madagascar decided to, please, could you please go to the second slide? The second one, please. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so from 2015, the government of Madagascar decided to liberalize the economy on energy sector. That means the government encouraged the private sector to implement and participate in that reforms, especially for the private sector. In Madagascar, our situation in terms of access to the electricity is very, very low compared of the countries in the same level of Madagascar in sub-Saharan countries in Africa. For example, in 2020, it is around 13% of the people or household in Madagascar which could access to the rural electricity. And it is around 30% in national level. In a country like Togo, Malawi, and something like that, for example, it is less than 20% and around 80% in the whole countries in Africa. Next step, please. This is a picture on which I could share with you how important is the potentialities in terms of energy based on the renewable electricity in Madagascar. Like if I talk, for example, about the wind energy, we have around more than 2,000 megawatt potentiality for the electricity for wind energy. And more than of that, when we talk about hydroelectric power plant, that's why Tany Meva Foundation decided to test and to set up some pilot project on hydroelectric power plant in Madagascar. We have since 2012 the opportunity to set up 5 unity of hydroelectric in rural areas of Madagascar. Next slide, please. Okay, so the particularity of our experiences is it is a small hydroelectric power plant around 5 kilowatt, 200 or 200 kilowatt. And the particularity of those micro hydroelectric power plant is it is very affordable for poor people who live in rural areas, very isolated place. The maintenance and the management of those unity is not very difficult for them, despite of their low competencies for the maintenance of the power plant. And we don't have any difficulty to set up those unity in a very remote areas in Madagascar. The important thing on which we could draw from these experiences is the facility of the payment for ecosystem services and the facility of the people who manage those hydroelectric power plant, the implementation of POS, I mean the payment for ecosystem services. And we don't have any difficulty to convince them to participate in this process because the payment directly or indirectly that we ask to the pupil to pay for the conservancies, I mean the part of the bill that they pay, and we are going to reallocate it for the conservation of the protected areas around the hydro power plant is not very, it is very easy because they understand like the part, I mean 10% for example, that we draw from the bill, we are going to allocate it for the tree planting, for the control, and we ask even those people to participate, and they are very involved in the process. Next slide, please. But despite those best practices and benefits we could draw from that experience, there are so many challenges which is not depend of the Tany Meva Foundation, but the policy which is imposed. Excuse me to say imposed by the government, because everything is like a movie. Because I take an example, the government decided to set up a national agencies which supposed to be to have their independence in terms of decision, but that is not the case. The government, for example, where they get funds from the World Bank with important level, the Prime Minister or the President of the Republic, they decided on how to manage and where they are going to set up the hydropower plant in Madagascar. So the impact of the situation is the existence of encroachment between those national agencies and the government. We have as well so many multitude of laws which are not easy for the execution agency to implement the policy of the government. For example, until 2015, we have 4 laws, 7 decrees, for ministerial ruling. I mean, each year, the government, they try to take new initiatives with new laws. It is very difficult as well, thanks the motivation of the private sector to contribute to or for the promotion of access to the electricity in rural areas. Their lack of law, I mean legal vacuum, to facilitate the key stakeholders, I mean the local structure, to manage the hydroelectric power plant in rural areas. And that situation is a barrier to advance very quickly in the promotion of the access to the electricity in rural areas. And the last thing which is considered by Fondation Tany Meva as a challenge is about the budget, the annual budget allocated to the Ministry of Energy to promote and to implement the policy of the government. It is only 2% of the annual budget of the government, which is allocated for the Ministry of Energy. Next step, please. Yeah, what is the lessons learned and recommendation that we could draw from 8 years ago while we implemented the promotion of hydroelectric power plant in rural areas? We understand first that the contribution of public and private partnership is very fundamental. The government itself could not implement their policy themselves. They have to ask and to involve the private sector to implement their policy. We understand as well, like the community-based approach is very, very important. I mean, the involvement of the local community to manage and to fix the power plant in rural areas is very, very interesting, even only in terms of security of power plant. But it seems like the situation here in Madagascar, when you are in rural areas, the capacity of the people who supposed to manage and to fix those hydropower plant is very low. So now we try to capitalize and try to understand like how to improve their capacity, allowing them to have a sustainability of managing those power plant. That is in the same process with the sustainable finance for the maintenance of those unity. We understand as well, like we have to convince the government to implement the payment for ecosystem services, not only for for energy sector, but for another sectors such as agriculture, water, and so on. And at the end of the process, while we implement the PS mechanism, we believe like when we are going to impose the implementation of the payment for ecosystem services for the company working on the energy sector, we believe like the sustainability finance for conservation is very effective. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's my presentation. Now here in Madagascar, after our experiences on the implementation of payment for ecosystem services on energy sector, the government decided to implement these financial sustainable finance mechanisms with another sector, as I said, on another key sectors like agriculture, water, and health. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Claude, for sharing those experiences from Madagascar and the Tany Meva Foundation. As I mentioned earlier, we have some time to engage and to get more information on the two presentations that have already been made. As I mentioned at the beginning, if participants could please post any questions or comments in the Q&A link that is at the bottom of the page. There are a couple of questions for Sean. So Sean, I will start with you, but if there are other questions for Claude and the Madagascar experience, please come forward with those so that we can have a discussion on them. So Sean, quite a few comments on the very interesting presentation. I think what's of interest, especially as we have all been experiencing this global pandemic, is I mean, how Biofund managed to, I mean, initially it was, I mean, you used funding from your own endowment, which was the board approved the use of that funding. However, you were able to leverage funding from other organizations that willingly and quickly came to the table to be part of this collaboration. So this is very interesting. And can you elaborate a little bit more on how that, how that engagement was in terms of leveraging the additional funding that was needed for the Biofund emergency fund?
Okay, thanks, Karen. And I think that's a really important lesson here, is we didn't actually have to do much fundraising. What we found is by taking that first step and just moving ahead, showing that there was something that could be done, there was a concrete and specific need. We managed to articulate it reasonably well. It's quite good for communications that half the rangers in the country are at risk. We need to act quickly and we need to act now. And I think we're finding that donors have money. They have money and they want to help. What they don't have are good, clear ideas on how to help and ways that they can quickly mobilize those resources. Now, there are some donors that are have more difficult sets of procedures in mobilizing extra funds. Some can shuffle around within projects. Others have fresh funding lines, but they're looking for ways to do it. We had a really good, we had the advantage that the Swedish government, for example, was already negotiating a collaboration with the World Bank. We are already working with the World Bank, so we already have an agreement with them for some funds already. So it was just adding extra funds from a new donor to an existing funding mechanism. So that was very quick administratively. USAID, it's taken a couple of months, but that's fine. They're only funding a small amount of the overall cost. The really key part of this was have our own money, mobilize it, start spending it, and people will join you. They want to help. If you show them the way, they'll come to you. And there are other people who've talked to us as well. Discussions are ongoing. There are other donors who are interested. And I really think we may not end up even needing those loans after all, is we'll have enough grant money from the different sources to be able to meet the needs, which is wonderful. And so maybe we were in a slightly privileged position and we already had some agreements with some donors, but I really think that the key bit was having our own funds and be willing to spend them up front.
And just as a follow-up to that, you mentioned that there was 2 phases to the program. And I mean, looking at the COVID pandemic situation, how do you guarantee, or how do you think this could be sustainable in the long term? especially if the pandemic continues?
Well, we see tourism is a sector that traditionally, if you look historically, has suffered a lot of impacts from various things, whether it's Indonesia being hit by a tsunami, whether it's an insurgency that threatens, or a terrorist attack in Kenya that all of a sudden drops tourism by 20 or 30% in that country for a year or two. But it's quite resilient. It comes back. I mean, most of the Caribbean has been hit by a hurricane at some point and had large chunks of their tourism industry destroyed. It goes down, but it comes back.
Yeah.
So we're quite confident it's going to come back. And particularly for this sector, as I mentioned, the private sector operators, they are running, because it is mostly big game hunting tourism, to be honest. It is a tourism niche that is almost ideal for COVID. It's very, very isolated. It's very small volume. It's a few people a year, one or two clients at a time. They go in the middle of bush where they're tens or hundreds of kilometers from any significant population center. It should be a sector that, once the travel problem is solved, should come back quickly. And the operators will continue then to go back to a business model that has been functioning for quite a long time. So we're fairly confident that it will. At the same time, we're aware that it might not be solved by June. It might take up until December next year. We have some money already in reserve stored for that. We have, as I said, we're already talking to additional donors who might be interested in funding a longer period. We have the time now, because we've got until next June, to negotiate and probably garner additional resources to deal with a longer term pandemic. And then we have the sort of safety net, as perhaps could be called, is of the potential loan provisions. And I noticed there were a couple of questions on the question and answer on how exactly it's structured and whether we have collateral and how much interest they pay. At the moment, as I mentioned in the presentation, we're not doing loans yet. We have enough grant money, we're just doing grants. And many of those questions you've raised here in the chat are questions we ourselves are asking. How can we really charge no interest? Or will we have to charge a bit of interest to get back costs? Will we administer it directly ourselves, or will we work through a third-party provider such as a local investment bank who can provide that specialized knowledge? Do we really need collateral, or is the fact that they're ongoing productive businesses enough for us? These are questions that we'll have to answer to our own board before they'll permit and authorize those loan funds to actually be dispersed. But the principle has been approved and we have it in our back pocket. We're not using it now. And I really hope that we continue to be successful in fundraising, because obviously any money that's lent to operators will eventually have to be paid back. And so it'll come out of future revenues for them. So if we can provide them with a real solid pillow of support now, then they should be able to bounce back to profitability much quicker. And hopefully in the future, they might even become donors back to Biofund in years to come.
Yeah. Just a final one, Sean, has there been any, have you seen any changes to the local tourism? I mean, I do understand with lockdowns and things like that, it's been a difficult business and a difficult industry. But have any of the tour operators taken a concerted step towards providing opportunities for local tourism?
There's a small amount of local tourism. However, local tourism is generally much more interested in ecotourism rather than consumptive tourism, which is very, very much lower value tourism.
Yeah.
Just for those of you who have no understanding of the sector, a big game safari that is a hunting safari could be upwards of $150,000 for one safari. 3 weeks in the bush. So you don't need a lot of those to maintain your viability as an enterprise. To replace that with ecotourism, really you're looking at having masses of thousands, tens of thousands of people coming in to be able to replace that kind of income. And that's just, they don't have the structure for it. They're built to have a very small number of high-paying tourists.
Yeah.
And while they're recovering a few dollars here and there in ecotourism and local tourism, but it's no replacement, unfortunately.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sean, for providing us with those explanations and responses to the various questions. Claude, over to you. Just a quick question on the PES system, Madagascar. How easy was it to implement? How easy was it to educate the various stakeholders, the power companies, on the model of payment for ecosystem service, and to bring them on board? Was this the first time this was being done within the energy sector?
Yeah, thank you so much for that interesting question. I could say Tany Meva Foundation is among the national organization or international organization working here in Madagascar who promote energy, renewable energy. And I believe like we are the first organization who experiment the payment for ecosystem services. At the beginning of which the household benefit the electricity, as we talk with poor people in rural areas, it is very difficult for them to understand like how is the process of the payment for ecosystem services. Why, for example, we take from the bill 10%, so we have to implement them. And when I mean, we have to involve them in the process. For example, we play the transparent and social accountability of the process. I mean, the good governance on how we use the money. So it is very, very easy for us to implement these experiences. I mean, sustainable finance on conservation. For example, we targeted 500 households when we started to draw from the bill, I mean the 10%, and the level, I mean the amount of the bill is not depend on the consumption of the household, but we fix just an amount at the beginning. So I could say like only 50% of the targeted household which gets the electricity during the 2 first years, and the 10%, I think it is around 5% of the 50% of the household who get the electricity during the two first years. Yeah.
Okay, so is there any revenue sharing, or is the main benefit that communities are getting is access to electricity, obviously, and the management of the catchment around where the water source is, so that at least there's some sort of ecosystem functioning that is taking place while providing this energy at the same time?
In the reality, when we get, for example, I say something like $5,000 of the totality of the bill from the household, we reallocated 10%, which represent the payment for ecosystem services, and that was 10% were reallocated directly for the conservation and other activities related on the conservation of the protected areas around the power electric of the hydroelectric power plant, and the 100% is reallocated to pay the salary of the employees working on the hydroelectric, as well as the maintenance for the unity. Yeah.
And do you have an idea of how much has been raised in the PS scheme, the PS mechanism?
We have 5 hydroelectric power plants now. And even we started to set up those hydroelectric since 2015. In the reality, we need like 5 years to be the hydro power plant is very operational. So now it is only 1 year from which we experiment the payment for ecosystem services. And as I said, like the amount is not depending from the consumption, but we fix the amount at the first time. So it is very, very low so far. So we are in the process to implement it. And when we arrive to give the access to the all targeted household, so after that, we could say like we are going to ask those households to pay depending on their consumption. So that's why I could not say like how much was raised so far, because the situation is very different between those 5 hydroelectric power plants.
And does Tany Meva have any plans to try this with other renewable energies? I think you mentioned on the map the potential of other types of renewable energy across the country. So is this something that you would also be exploring to try other alternative energies, and would it work?
Now we work with the government through the Ministry of Energy to capitalize the experiences that we implement, especially from energy sector. And seems like from 2 years ago, they have another companies who work on another sector like agriculture and water. So after that, we are going to try like if it is possible for us, because we have our own money to finance another experiences on another sector, and we wait the results of that capitalization to promote the PS on another sectors.
Okay, thank you so much. I think on that, I think from the comments, I think there's some experience that can be shared from Kenya. I know that there is also experience on hydro and PS system also from Malawi. So I think within the network and within the continent, we have a lot of these type of initiatives that have been taking place. And this is really a platform where we can share and collaborate on these initiatives. Maybe back to Sean. Sean, do you have any final thoughts, final words that you'd like to share from your story from the field?
I think I've spoken enough at the moment. Thanks everyone for attending this session. We have lots of people here. I think it's been a great session, lots of interesting questions. Please do reach out individually through the app if you want to talk about it or ask additional questions that you think about after this session is over, or for those of you now watching this on tape on Facebook. And we'd like to talk about it more, and we're willing to answer any questions you might have moving forward. But I think our experience is something that could quite easily be replicated in other areas if people are interested in doing that.
Thanks, Sean. And any final comments, words from Claude, Madagascar?
Yeah, based on our own experiences, when we need like payment for ecosystem services where get a success, we have to involve the local structures, and public and the private partnership is very important. That's what we draw from our experiences as a key success in terms of payment for ecosystem services. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And from myself, many thanks to Claude and Sean for sharing their experiences this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are. This brings us to the close of this session on stories from the field. And we will be, please join us again. The next session will be starting in about 30 minutes. And it will be on fundraising priorities in times of crisis, which is also a very important session. And we have some very good, key speakers that will be participating in that. So please join us again in about 30 minutes for the next session on fundraising priorities, especially in times of crisis. Thank you so much from me, and we'll see you soon.